Operating within a single domestic market offers a corporation a baseline of predictability. Economic indicators, legal structures, and cultural norms are generally known, quantifiable variables that a centralized headquarters can model and plan for. Crossing international borders shatters that predictability. An organization attempting global expansion immediately encounters a barrage of unquantifiable, often conflicting data points from entirely different environmental realities. A business model optimized for one country now has to survive severe currency fluctuations, hostile local legislation regarding foreign ownership, and cultural barriers affecting consumer behavior. The sheer volume and velocity of these new variables easily overwhelm traditional domestic planning models. If a central organization tries to process all this raw data using its existing systems, it risks complete administrative collapse. A corporation cannot simply export its domestic operations. Scaling across borders requires an entirely new philosophical and structural architecture designed specifically to process environmental chaos. Before building that architecture, executive leadership must make a binary philosophical choice regarding their global market. The first option relies on Theodore Levitt's theory of globalization, the standardized approach. Standardization treats the entire globe as a single, homogeneous entity. The objective is to achieve massive economies of scale in manufacturing and marketing by delivering an identical product and a uniform brand message, regardless of local geography. The opposing framework abandons homogenization entirely. This is the multi-domestic strategy. A multi-domestic approach assumes markets are inherently heterogeneous. It forces the firm to fracture its central brand identity and aggressively tailor its marketing mix, pricing, and product features to the specific, localized realities of each target country. Often, localized consumer demands dictate product specifications so thoroughly that the theoretical cost-saving benefits of a standardized global assembly line become mathematically irrelevant. Regardless of whether a multinational chooses total standardization or aggressive localization, its survival depends on implementing two rigid administrative architectures. The chosen strategy will determine the specific tactics deployed in the field, but the underlying systems required to execute them, formal planning and formal control, are universally mandatory for any firm operating beyond its own borders. The first mandatory architecture is the International Marketing Planning Matrix. This table represents the academic baseline of how a firm structures its international ambition. To understand how it functions, we have to look at the structural grid. It maps strategic decision areas on the y-axis against chronological planning stages on the x-axis. The y-axis lists what the firm must decide: the level of capital commitment, the geographic scope, the entry strategy, the marketing organization, and the specific marketing mix. The x-axis establishes the sequential gauntlet those decisions must run through: SWOT evaluation, formulating specific objectives, forecasting sales and prices, developing the programs, and finally, assigning budgets. The intersectionality of this grid ensures discipline. An abstract decision on the y-axis cannot become authorized policy until it successfully clears every sequential stage on the x-axis. For example, an aggressive market entry strategy must be filtered rigorously through the specific weaknesses and threats present in the host country before it can ever be assigned a budget. The matrix operates as a filtering mechanism. It converts abstract global ambitions into a concrete database of localized actions, constrained by strict financial boundaries. Generating a comprehensive, budget-constrained plan is only the initial step. That matrix is functionally useless if the multinational lacks the mechanical ability to enforce it across thousands of miles. This creates the paradox of international control. As geographic and cultural distance from headquarters increases, the necessity for operational control rises sharply, yet the actual ability to exert that control plummets. To solve this paradox, firms rely on the second mandatory architecture, the International Marketing Control System. Reconstructing this schematic shows how a central headquarters maintains operational reality over foreign subsidiaries without resorting to day-to-day micromanagement. It begins by passing established objectives to the control method sequence. Headquarters converts broad objectives into precise, quantifiable standards and then assigns specific personal responsibility for achieving them. These very standards act as objective tripwires. By establishing strict numerical benchmarks, like specific sales volume or quarterly profit margins, headquarters removes subjective cultural bias from the evaluation of a foreign subsidiary's performance. This leads to the most vulnerable node in the entire architecture, the formalization of communication. Relying on informal check-ins or localized reporting formats is catastrophic. Without rigorous, standardized reporting metrics transmitted uniformly, the communication link distorts. Headquarters becomes blind to failures occurring in the field. Effective control relies on building a variance detection system. It automatically flags headquarters the moment a remote subsidiary deviates from the initial blueprint authorized by the planning matrix. As standardized data transmits through the communication node, it hits the end stage of the flowchart, continuous review and variance detection. The resulting outcome here is strictly binary. If the field data matches the predetermined standards, local operations continue unimpeded. If variance is detected, the system immediately triggers a secondary protocol. This initiates the corrective action phase. Headquarters must diagnose the root cause. Did the foreign subsidiary fail to execute the plan properly, or was the original corporate plan flawed from the start? An unpredictable event, like a severe local labor strike or sudden import restrictions, might render the original benchmarks impossible. In those cases, the correct action is resetting the baseline objectives, rather than penalizing the subsidiary for environmental chaos. The control chain operates as a self-correcting feedback loop. Its function is continuous calibration, aligning localized execution in the field with the central corporate intent. Viewing the planning matrix and the control flowchart side by side reveals the complete architectural ecosystem of the multinational firm. There is an absolute dependency between these models. Enforcing control over a foreign market is impossible without the baseline data and financial boundaries generated by the planning matrix. The final outputs of the matrix, the strict budgets and sales forecasts, serve as the literal input nodes that establish the standards for the control chain. The integration flows in reverse as well. Operational variance and execution failures identified in the field feed directly back into the SWOT analysis stage, strictly informing how the firm plans its strategy for the next cycle. Planning and control are not isolated administrative exercises. They are two halves of a single, continuous, operational engine. Global expansion guarantees exposure to chaos, distance, and unpredictability. A multinational corporation's competitive advantage rarely stems solely from a superior physical product or a clever localized advertising campaign. Long-term survival across borders is dictated entirely by systemic rigor, the ability of its organizational architecture to absorb environmental shocks without fracturing. In international business, true operational agility requires a rigid framework capable of processing infinite localized variables.